Okay, so here we are, final exam review. And this is over mostly what we did since midterm, but there are a few things that might touch on stuff from before midterm. So this is the basic information. Anything that's not in the slideshow won't be on the midterm, or won't be on the final, sorry. Won't be on the final if it's not in the slideshow. But if it's in the slideshow, it doesn't necessarily mean it will all be in. There will be about 25 questions, and that will be it. Okay, so generative AI images. Artificial intelligence can be used to generate detailed images from trained information, sampled and tested images. So, examples of how image generation works, and I got these quotes. Latent diffusion models are deep learning models that have recently emerged as a powerful high-resolution image generation and manipulation technique. They are probabilistic models that can generate high-quality images by starting with random noise and gradually transforming them into realistic images through a diffusion process. And this is from a medium.com article. So what does that mean? It means that these types of AI start with a fuzzy, like random noise image. And noise means it doesn't have a picture. It's just got changing colors of pixels. Okay, so there's just dots. It takes this noise and then it looks for places where it has comparisons that look the same or similar in photographs and images that are in the learning process. They had trained the AI by showing it lots of images, putting lots of images into its memory. And it looks through those images and sees if there's something that's similar to a spot, an area in this random noise field. And then it sort of takes that random noise and puts it into a next generation image that has only the noise that relates to something that's similar to the image. And it does this over and over because the computer can go so fast. It can do thousands and millions of these operations quickly. And then it comes up with a picture that has similarities with the images that it had in its memory. And that's how it comes up with a realistic image. And that's the latent diffusion model. Then another model is called the neural style transfer, where it takes images and then it looks at the style content of another image. So it's a deep learning application that fuses the content of one image with the style of another image to create a brand new piece of art. So it takes images of dogs and it looks at styles of images of dogs, and then it sort of gloms it all together and it comes up with a new picture. So these are a couple of ways that artificial intelligence works. Very simplified definition, description of what it does, but you get sort of an idea that why is it making new pictures? Because it's using information it has to try to find something that will answer the question you asked. So that's how it works. So using Adobe Firefly, the prompt is entered and effects such as themes, techniques, and artistic movements are applied. So remember when we did that, we came up with a prompt and then we added the effects and styles to it. And then it figured out what we wanted to look at. So that's one AI program that we're using. Also, we use DALL-E 3. The prompt can be generated using ChatGPT-4, and then it can be tweaked through several different versions and refinements until the image is what you would like. So I said, illustrate this poem, and I had the poem that I just taped and copied and pasted. And then down at the bottom, you can say, it says, here are the illustrations based on the poem you provided. I hope they capture the essence and beauty of the winter solstice day described in the poem. So it gives you feedback that way. So I had started by using a poem that I got out of ChatGPT-4. and then I threw it into DALL-E 3, and then I said, illustrate this poem, and then it started giving me answers like this, and then I would say, I like number 1, can you make more pictures that I like that, but bigger, or something like that. So you go through all these, it's a conversation. So that's another way that we work with the AI. So there's a lot of different ways that AIs work. Each program has a different way to use the prompts, but in general, it's basically you give it words, it gives you pictures. Some useful keyboard shortcuts. Now, these are shortcuts that I've been using in class, and I'll tell you when I'm using it, and I'll show you when we're working together on something and you're asking me for help. I will say press P, because that reveals position transforms. So these are all things that we've used in class. Keyboard shortcuts in the timeline in After Effects. U reveals all the keyframes that have been created for the current layer, or if no layer is selected, it reveals all the keyframes for the current comp. AA for 3D, materials options for a 3D layer or light options for a light layer. So if you wanted to change your light options or change some of the material options for the layer, you press AA. LL reveals the audio waveform for a sound layer. So if you have a sound layer and you click on it and you press LL, it shows you the waveform. This is very helpful when you're trying to put in the keyframes, so you can see where in a timeline something is going to be happening in the sound layer. A V is the selection tool. When you have a different tool selected, you press V and you get your selection tool back. And then P reveals position transforms for the current layer, or if no layer selection, selected all of the layers. And T reveals opacity transforms. R reveals rotation transforms. And S reveals scale transforms. So you'll be able to change anything related to scale by pressing S. You'll be able to change anything related to rotation by pressing R. And when you have a 3D layer and you press R, it shows you not only the orientation, which, as I said, I really didn't touch the orientation yet, but you can keyframe orientation. It shows you the orientation for the entire layer, everything, or it shows you 3 different rotation settings, because you can rotate on X, Y, or Z. So that is a very useful one, a shortcut to use when you want to do some rotations. Press the R, so you don't have all the other transforms showing. Then universal keyboard shortcuts that work in all programs or most programs. Command Z will undo the previous action, and in some programs you can just keep hitting Command Z and keep going back a step. And you can do that pretty much as many times as you've made steps in After Effects until you get to a place where you saved. Command A will select all, and it depends on whether you're in the timeline window or the project window, what all it selects. So remember, if you're in the project window and you press Command A, it's going to select everything that's up here in the project window. If you want to select all of the layers in your timeline, you have to have the timeline selected. Then when you press Command A, it selects all the layers in your timeline. And then Command S, of course, saves your file. It saves your file and saves your life. So here's what it looks like when you press U. So I press U and it shows me any transform that has a keyframe that's been created. And that includes your regular transforms, or if you have made for your type, some type of a type animator, it will show you the keyframes for the type animator that have been created. So pressing U shows you all of the keyframes. If it's one layer you've got selected, it shows you all the keyframes on that layer. If you have no layer selected, it will show you every keyframe in the entire comp. So that one is very useful. AA Pressing AA reveals the materials options and geometry options for a 3D layer, or the light or camera options for those types of layers. So here are the geometry options and the materials options for a layer that is a text layer, and it shows you every single thing on that layer. Anything you can change that would affect a 3D material or 3D geometry. Bevel, extrusion, shadows, lights, reflections. Then LL, when you have a sound layer selected, it will show you all of the ups and downs in the waveform. So you can see where things happen in the waveform. Please don't have conversations while I'm trying to tell. Okay, so, and here are all of the different transforms, keyboard shortcuts. So P is the shortcut for position. S is the shortcut for scale. R is the shortcut for rotation. You can see there are the X, Y, and Z rotations right there. And then T is the shortcut for opacity. After Effects 3D lights, there are 4 types of lights, 4. And you got to remember what the different types of lights do, because it's important to remember what they are. Because when you're working on a file and you have a specific thing you want the light to do, you want to be able to choose the correct type of light. So the ambient light, it doesn't cast shadows. It's a fill light. It has no definite direction. It just creates illumination that's evenly distributed. A spotlight will cast shadows. It has a definite direction and a focus. So the spotlight, you can move it around so that there's more light in one particular spot. A point light casts shadows, and it fills from the center, and it has a source. And so the direction is just, here's the source. The direction is everywhere away from the source, both in front of you and behind you, everywhere. It fills out. So it's not like the ambient light because it casts shadows and it comes from one particular spot. But in a sense, it is more like an ambient light than a spotlight, because you can't focus it on one thing because it's not pointing at it. It's just spreading out from a center. Then a parallel light casts shadows, lights evenly, and has a definite direction, but no focus. So it's sort of like a spotlight that's been crossed with a point light. And it doesn't have a direction. Well, it has a direction, but it has no focus. So it's going only forward. So it's not like the spotlight where you can control where the shadow is going out from the rays. The rays are going straight. So if you have the light that is centered right in front of something, you're not going to see the shadow because it'll be exactly the same size as the object all the way back to the wall. It's not going to spread out from perspective. So here's what happens with an ambient light. You can see I've got the 2 views. So the left side shows you what the light looks like from above. And you would see the little wireframe showing you the shape of the light if it had a light shape, but the ambient light has no shape. So there's nothing on the left. And on the right, everything's completely lit. It's completely full. This is a spotlight, and you can see on the left, it shows you the place where the light starts. So it starts right here. This is the center of the what it is. This is its position. And then this shows you the direction that the rays are going. So they're spreading out as they get further away from the point where it begins. So the origin point is right there, and then it spreads out. And it goes in one direction. So that is what a spotlight does. Has a specific source and direction. The light has a cone shape, and it can have a soft or sharp edge. If an object goes behind the light, it's going to be dark. So the light has a position. It's negative 444. And if you have something at negative 1,000, it's going to be behind the light and it won't be illuminated. Now this is a point light. It's like an incandescent bulb. So you can see the source of this light is there. It's this little dot right here, and it's got little rays coming out from it because the rays go out completely around it, 360 degrees. So there isn't a cone because it's just spreading out light, and it gets darker the further away it gets from the source. So that's why it's brighter in the middle, and then it gets darker as it gets further away. And then this is a parallel light, which does have a source, but the source is like infinitely wide. So the direction of the light is shown from here, but the light rays are all going straight in the same direction. They would be going straight here, or they'd be going straight here. And this is what it looks like. It looks a lot like just the ambient light, except it will cast shadows, and it has a behind, a front and a back, unlike the ambient light. So the parallel light will cast shadows, and it has a direction, but the direction is all parallel, so it doesn't spread out. Now, 3D shadows. 3D layers allow cast shadows that are calculated from the direction and the source of light. So if it's going to cast shadows, it figures out where the shadow is going to be by figuring out first, where is the light pointed, and what direction will the light be traveling when it gets there. And then it passes the position and the shape of the 3D object in the path of the light rays, and it figures out where the darkness would be. Shadows can only be cast if the 3D layers have the correct material settings, and the light is a spotlight or a point light or a parallel type with cast shadows enabled. So if you're having trouble with your shadows, if they're not showing up, first thing you look for is, are my lights casting shadows? Do I have the kind of light that casts shadows? Is cast shadows turned on? Do my objects have cast shadows enabled? It's cast shadows turned on for the object. And then, is the object you're trying to cast a shadow onto accepting shadows? You got to look at that. So those are the kind of things you have to look at if you're having trouble with shadows. And also there is, as we found out, Jonathan and I, if you have everything on the same Z space, it's not going to cast shadows. It has to be separated from the object that it's supposed to cast shadows on. So you won't have any shadows if everything's on the same Z space. So to create shadows in an After Effects file, in the foreground layers, turn on 3D, enable shadows under the materials options, and in the background layer, turn on 3D and enable accept shadows under the materials options. Also make sure that your lights are casting shadows. So what is 3D space? You've got X, Y, and Z coordinates. This is the Cartesian coordinate system. And this refers to the man who first decided this is the way to talk about it, was a mathematician whose name was Descartes. And so Cartesian is taken from his name, Descartes. The Cartesian coordinate system refers to the X, Y, and Z graph used to place objects in the 3D computer graphics world. In Z space, in the world of 3D graphics, in the 3D world of After Effects, the Z-axis is oriented away from the viewer. Therefore, a negative Z number will bring an object closer to the viewer, and a positive number will make it further away from the viewer. So in the After Effects 3D world, X, Y, and Z coordinates, the X-axis, which is the axis that goes along the horizon, is red. So the red arrow axis is the horizontal axis. Numbers and the rulers start at the left at 0 and move to 1280 to the right, because that's the size of our file. Now, if you're working in a different size file, it's going to depend on what width and height the file is. But because we're using the 1280 by 720, I'm just going to tell you so you can think about it and relate it to what you're doing. That 1280 is the width of the file, and the 0 is on the left, and the 1280 is on the right. The y-axis is the green arrow axis, and it's the vertical axis. Numbers start at the top of the file at 0 and move downward to 720 at the bottom. The z-axis is the blue arrow axis. It's the depth and space axis. Numbers will start at 0 at the midplane of the screen. And if you look at the top view in your 3D, you'll see that the middle of the screen has the 0 on it. And then it goes to positive numbers as you move away from the viewer and negatives as you move toward the viewer. Now, since you don't limit the depth in space in your file size, there aren't any numbers that you can attach to that as being the end of it. At some point, you won't be able to actually use a higher or lower number than you do. I mean, if you go over a certain number, it's just not gonna actually be able to show it to you. Can't render a number that's so big that it's smaller than a pixel in perspective. So, but there aren't really any numbers to say specifically. So here's the red arrow axis, the x-axis, and you see for position, it's the first one. So X is the first number, and the middle of the screen is always 640 in the default position. When you first open your file and start something, the middle is going to be 640, so that's half of 1280. And it's the red arrow axis. And then the y-axis is the green arrow axis, and it's the middle one right here. And it's 360 because that's half of 720. So it always puts the middle right at 360. And then the z-axis. Now here I'd already moved this. When you bring something in, it generally starts at 0. I moved it to 444 to make it further away from viewer. And that's blue. Rotations. When you're rotating things in 3D, it's hard to think about how it's going to affect it unless you can practice it. So practice rotating things just so you get a better feel for it. But a rotation of 90 degrees around the x-axis will allow you to lay a flat plane down like a floor or a ceiling. And using the position on the Y, you can move it up or down. So you start with just a shape that is the size of your file. And you rotate it 90 degrees, and it goes from being straight up and down to being like this. Okay? So it goes from here to here. And then it's like a floor. The y-axis will allow you to create a wall in the middle of the stage. So if you rotate it by 90 degrees, it starts out just your regular flat plane. You're looking at it, got this rectangular shape. And then you rotate it by 90 degrees and it comes out like that. So it's like a wall. And then the z-axis will spin it around like a pinwheel. So it'll start doing this, right? So that's what z does. Now you can put more than one rotation on an object. You can rotate things on all of the different coordinates, but I would suggest you want to do each coordinate separately first, and then you can fine tune it. But it's hard to describe it, hard to understand it if you try to change all the numbers at the same time. So do one at a time, just to be simpler. So here is the X rotation, and it rotates by coming towards you. And here's the Y, and it rotates by going, when you're looking at it, when I'm looking at it, it goes like this. When you're looking at me, it would be going like this. And then the Z goes around and around. So I'm doing this for you. Text animators. The text animators will animate position, rotation, opacity, and other transforms. They are the basis of the typewriter effect and the other text animation presets. They can be saved as your own animation presets if you want to. Text animators also allow you to use wiggle, bloat, and other properties and effects. Per character 3D allows the transformation of individual letters in X, Y, and Z space. And we went through that in the tutorials, and you saw how rotating the different letters as per character 3D could be done. Did you get him? Yes, ma'am. Then camera settings and focal length. 35 millimeters, that's a common wide angle lens, fisheye. 50 milliliters is a normal lens. That's the way that your eyes usually translate space. And then 135 milliliters is a telephoto lens that makes things that are further away look bigger. But it also kind of, it negates perspective. So someone that's standing 100 feet away and someone who's standing right in front of you will look like they're the same height. So, but these are different camera settings that you can use when you're working with 3D. So remember that there are different types of cameras, that the ones that have smaller numbers are wide angle, the ones that have larger numbers are telephoto, and the 50 milliliters, the normal lens. The camera orbit null. We used that when we did the camera tutorial. And it allows you to change the position that the camera is moving to and moving from without actually moving the camera. It controls the camera. And then if you don't like what the motion is, you can delete the null and the camera goes back to where it started and you can go over again. If you have moved the camera around, it's hard to get it back to where it first started, right? So the camera null is very good. Also, you can control many different things with a null, and it makes it a lot easier to control things. So a camera orbit null is an empty layer that is a parent of the camera layer and allows you to control the rotation and position without changing the camera transforms. Now, keyframe types. Linear, hold, roving, easy ease in, easy ease out. The linear is the one that just is the default. That's what it comes on as. So linear interpolation creates a uniform rate of change between keyframes. Hold keyframes, just hold it until you put in another keyframe. So it'll just stay there and jump. It jumps to the place where you've put another keyframe. Roving will keep the spacing proportionally constant between the keyframes. Easy ease keyframes have Bezier handles and let you adjust the rate of change as the object nears the keyframe. So if you easy ease, it's going to speed up and slow down between keyframes. Easy ease in is like trains in a railway station. You ease into the station to slow down to a stop, and you ease out of the station as you speed up as you leave. So easy ease in and easy ease out. Remember, trains in a train station. Now, the definition of easing in and easing out might change between programs. So be careful. And if you use a different computer program, make sure you understand the way that they're using the term, because it's kind of iffy sometimes. But easy ease in, ease into the train station. Easy ease out of the train station. Options available in the Cinema 4D renderer. When you select the Cinema 4D renderer, you see the Cinema 4D warning box, because some things will work that don't work with the classic 3D. So extruded and beveled text and shapes, reflections, curved footage, material overrides on text shape bevels and sides. So you can add different colors to different parts of the text, especially. Environment layers are in reflections only. So when you want something to be reflected in your object, you've got to put in an environment layer. Otherwise, it just reflects the black background behind the camera and the lights. And that's not very effective. It makes everything look like it's black. So environment layers allow you to add something for the reflections to reflect. And especially if you're trying to make something look metallic, I find putting in a nice, bright, busy pattern or picture will make it look like it's really polished silver or something once you get those material settings up there. If you can get the reflections, and it will look very, very shiny. But things that don't work anymore will be blending modes, track mats, layer styles, masks and effects on continuously rasterized layers, text and shape layers, collapsed 3D composition, pre-composition types. So I find that some things will work with effects and some things won't, because it depends on how the effect is created. So some 3D layers will use effects, but only some effects. So you have to see if it's going to work. You have to test it. And lots of times when you have some kind of effect applied to a layer and you change that layer to 3D, it will disappear, especially if you change it to the Cinema 4D 3D. Classic 3D often will take the effect. So it's kind of thing where you have to decide what's more important and how can I do this. Sometimes you can pre-comp a layer and have it be classic 3D with an effect on it. And then you can just put that composition layer into your regular comp and have it be a Cinema 4D layer, because it can take the comp and make it a 3D Cinema 4D. So see what works. Underlying transparency doesn't work. Light transmission, transparency and index of refraction, accepts shadows only, motion blur, and camera depth of field. So these are things that will not work. But you get to use a lot of different kind of reflections and stuff, and you can always use opacity for transparency. So there are ways to work around it. Compression and codecs. Compression reduces the size of your file by keeping track of the information, but not saving each pixel or bit of information separately as the program normally would. And it's referred to as a codec, or a term meaning coder decoder or compression decompression. The video codec that we have been using to compress the video output is H.264. And if you don't use a compression and you just save it as a straight video file without compression, it will be huge. Remember, I've had to admonish people during critiques for files that were too big to really run. So, or very, very hard to download. So try to remember to compress it correctly. So the quiz will have 25 questions thereabouts, and it's based on the information in this review. You'll also complete the in-class project. And then it's not due on Thursday anymore, it's due on Friday. Okay, so, but we'll have the critique this Thursday. Any questions about that? Okay, so we are good.